Y'all, February was amazing, but March?
Insano style. Boom, bam, boom, bam.
These are the best must-listen metal albums of the month, and we're starting with Gorod and The Orb. I have been in love with this band since a maze of recycled creeds, and 5 years in the wake of the equally strong Aethra, this was one of my most anticipated follow-ups of 2023. And with bangers like Savitri and of course The Orb, I am not the least bit disappointed. In particular, that tapping section on We Are the Sun Gods is absolutely delightful. Just listening to the guitars on this album gives me arthritis, and that's not even to mention the equally dizzying bass and drumming. And compositions range from chaotic displays of technicality to others that resemble elements of Gojira. Prog fans, you know what you have to do.
It's time to harness the power of the orb.
Next up, we have Primitive Man and Full of Hell with Suffocating Hallucination. These are easily two of the most primal, destructive acts in metal right now, so you'd better believe I was beyond hyped to hear what a collaboration between the two would sound like. Trepanation for Future Joys is a pretty typical Primitive Man sounding track, while Rubble Home incorporates a little bit more of those Full of Hell noise elements. But the crown jewel is Closer Tunnels to God, which while initially focused on drone and ambient elements is ultimately building into a particularly harrowing bit of melodic doom misery. Over just 35 minutes, expect a variety of approaches to nihilism, from the appropriately titled 26-second grinder bludgeon to the bleak negative space of dwindling will. Then we have Viscera with Carcinogenesis. Viscera is a UK technical deathcore group I would recommend to fans of Within the Ruins, Silosis, and Born of Osiris. I loved their 2020 album Obsidian, and the songs like Rats with Wings and Omnipotence continue to deliver on those fast and furious Within the Ruins sounding low-end guitar lines that put most basic chuggers to shame. Not to mention the more melodic sections get downright epic at times in their melodrama. Now, I will say it took me a few listens to get into this new outing because the vocal performance can be a little hit and miss this time around, but the dual guitar work is so impressive that I can look past most of those faults and see the overall level of quality on display. Then we have Søstre with Søstre. On first listen, I described these Norwegians to the Discord as clutch with blackened vocals.
Sold!
And while that's not the full picture, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better description of rockin' tracks like Jernskogmøy and Psychonaut. Meanwhile, others like Enslaved have more of a Fugazi post-hardcore vibe, while the more proggy Hagen i Skiggen channels modern Enslaved. It's high energy, headbang worthy, but most of all, it's something a little bit different than anything else I've heard this year so far. And above all else, I'm always on the hunt for those albums that stand out from the pack. Time to open your third eye and howl at the moon. Next up is Contrarian with Sage of Shekhinah. Now, if Gorod isn't proggy or weird enough for you, New York band Contrarian is also back to get to that 90s sound. These guys are clearly more influenced by classic acts like Death, Cynic, and Atheist in how they approach their songwriting, and at times, right down to the production, tracks like Gehenna sound as if they could have come right off of symbolic or individual thought patterns. Now, as a result, this release may not be as accessible to some, given just how chaotic the guitars and bass can get, but musicians and lovers of the genre are going to gobble this up like they haven't eaten in weeks.
More.
Then we have Telos with Delude. Telos is a Danish Blackened mathcore band featuring members of LLNN, Eyes, Demersal, and Regarding Ambiguity, and are comparable to groups like Hexus and Plebeian Grandstand. Chaotic and noisy instrumentation akin to Converge collides with a dark, suffocating atmosphere for a truly harrowing experience seeming devoid of any sense of light. I know there are still some people in my audience who roll their eyes at the word mathcore, but trust me, the Scandinavian scene is an entirely different animal. This band is easily as extreme as any death or black metal act and could play circles around most of them, truly catastrophic and apocalyptic sounding stuff. Next up is Fange with Privation. I've been following this French industrial sludge group since 2016's Purge, and in that relatively short amount of time, they've already cultivated a pretty impressive discography. Their sound is clearly influenced by the works of Godflesh, but injects their own signature mix of dissonant noise and moody synth-infused post-punk. They can still get dark and disgustingly heavy, but with tracks like Ne pour trahir, this may also be their most ambitious album so far in terms of the more melodic sections. If you enjoyed Author and Punisher's latest release, I think you're going to find a lot to love with this one as well. Then we have Bury Tomorrow with The Seventh Son. So as the name would imply, this is the 7th studio album from this highly underrated UK metalcore band and the first to feature New Clean singer and keyboardist Tom Prendergast. And I have to say, as much as I enjoyed previous efforts like Cannibal with Jason Cameron, I think that Tom is bringing a whole new dynamic range to the band alongside Daniel's snarls, which are imposing as ever on songs like Heretic. Great riffs, awesome synths, and overall solid songwriting bring back that peak era Architects energy, and despite being around since the 2000s, this may be one of their best albums to date. Between this, August Burns Red, and whatever Unearth cooks up, 2023 is shaping up to be a pretty solid year for metalcore. Speaking of which, let's talk about August Burns Red with Death Below. Now, I've been a longtime fan of this band and consider them to be one of the most consistent metalcore groups of the 2000s that are still also putting out some of their best material. The singles on this one got me pretty hyped up again, not only with the usual display of great musicianship, but also some awesome guest appearances from the classic era of metalcore, including Spencer Chamberlain of Under Oath and Jesse Leach of Killswitch Engage. But as usual, the band does just fine on their own with an incredible mix of sing-along anthems, pit-worthy ragers, and progressive jaw-droppers, including the powerful closer Reckoning. Not a single dud to be found here for another album that might just be on par with my personal favorite Found in Faraway Places. Check out my tier list for the full discography ranking, but this is a must for metalcore fans, and maybe even those who don't generally like where the genre has gone. Then we have Majesties with Vast Reaches Unclaimed. I have frequently said that they don't make albums that truly sound like the Gallery of the Jester race anymore, given how production in melodic death metal has evolved over the years. But with this exquisite album, Majesties have come closer than I ever thought was possible. With members of Obsequiae and Inexorum, this is a singularity of pure 90s era nostalgia. Soaked in reverb, the guitar harmonies never fail to put a smile on my face, and just in general, I'm transported back to one of my favorite eras. The only feedback I have is that the vocals feel a little bit drowned out in comparison to the lush atmosphere, but otherwise, if you also go gaga for that early Gothenburg sound, you need to pick this up. Then we have Entheos with Time Will Take Us All. Another one of my more anticipated releases of 2023, with the incredible Dark Future having now come out almost 6 years ago. Just a duo for this album, Naveen handles all of the impressively technical and progressive guitars and drums, while Cheney continues to tear it up on vocals. Her syncopated screams continue to dominate, but it's also nice to hear some cleans too on tracks like Oblivion and I Am the Void. Absolute Zero is a total banger of an opener, seeming to fuse Meshuggah with Archspire and then moving seamlessly into the equally wicked In Purgatory and the Interior Wilderness. Really, the entire album feels like various movements of one singular but ever-changing progressive composition. And speaking of progressive, we also have Periphery with Periphery 5, Djent is not a genre. With the release of Wildfire and Zagreus, it was clear that this album would continue to both lean into their progressive side while also testing the limits of their aggression. Delivering catchy choruses, Meshuggah-esque interludes, and even some smooth jazz, and this scope holds true in many of the longer compositions, including Everything is Fine, Dracul Gra, and Atropos. Even shorter songs offer serious contrast, with Everything is Fine going nearly full Dillinger Escape Plan, only to be followed up immediately by the synth-pop surprise of Silhouette. The experimentation can be hit and miss at times, but it's always welcome over just regurgitating the same formula over and over again. Maybe not their best album, and you can check out my tier list ranking to see what I put for that, but true to form, still one of their more ambitious albums, and one of the best I've heard this year so far. Then we have Necropanther with
Betrayal.
One of my favorite underground bands is back again with their killer fusion of blackened thrash and melodic death metal. If you dug Hellripper last month and enjoyed bands like Skeleton Witch, you need to get this album. The sheer amount of riffage on display here alone is well worth the price tag. Furthermore, each Necropanther album is conceptually centered on a film adaptation of a novel, previously covering Dune and Logan's Run, and now tackling a combination of 1979's The Warriors and the ancient Greek story of Anabasis on which it is based. These elements only further expanding the impressive scope of their sound. Then we have Entropia with Total. Now, I have to level with you, I don't think this Polish band will ever top 2016's Ufonaut with its sort of psychedelic post-black metal sound. Since then, Entropia have been increasingly toying with more post-metal and post-rock elements, with Total being a decidedly more drifting experience, punctuated by a few sludgier moments. And while this one took a little bit longer for me to peel back its layers, I can't help but appreciate the unique fusions of electronics, prog, and even krautrock throughout its frequently instrumental runtime. In many ways, I'd liken it more to something like Russian circles and explosions in the sky than previous comparisons to Vatnet Viscera or Bossa de Naga. Regardless,
don't talk shit about Total!
There are honestly too many albums to cover in full this month, so a few honorable mentions before my final pick, including Demon King, Fortoken, Rotten Sound, Judiciary, and Keeper of Kalessin. You might find some of those reviewed by Chris over at metaltrenches.com. And I know a lot of you wanted me to cover Nia Obliviscaris, but honestly, I thought it was just okay. Some great performances, but I've never cared for their production, and the songwriting just felt a little bit meandering and unfocused to me. And my pick for the best metal album of March goes to Enslaved with Heimdal. In my book, Enslaved are one of the greatest bands of all time with one of the strongest discographies out there, and they have done it again with Heimdal. Even for those who didn't care for Utgard, this feels like a far more cohesive album while still showcasing the usual experimentation. Behind the Mirror starts things off on a very strong head bob-inducing note somewhat reminiscent of thoughts like Hammers, while Congelia calls back to their icier black metal roots. Forest Dweller has a lush sense of scope and wonder, but my favorite continues to be Caravans to the Outer Worlds. Start to finish, every track here has something special to offer, from surprising synth work to more obvious flourishes of 70s prog influence. Unmatched atmosphere as always, and another album you'll likely see in some year-end lists. Y'all check out this playlist for more of my best of the month recaps, and let me know down in the comments what were your favorite metal albums of March. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.